Welcome everyone to this information webinar. I'm Brad Perry, the Chief Executive Officer of Grain Producers SA. Thank you for joining us today. We're holding this webinar to discuss the current proposal to change the collection and method and rate of the Grain Industry Fund and the Grain Industry Research and Development Fund. This morning we'll hear from GPSA's John Gladigau and SAGIT Chair Andy Barr, who will outline some of the reasons behind the proposed change. We'll also hear from two champions of change, and we'll hear about a key SAGIT project. We'll then open it up for questions in a Q&A session. We'll save all the questions until the final session. If you do have a question during each presentation, please make sure you pop it in the Q&A box below when you think of it. We'll collate all the questions and put them to our speakers later on. You won't have the opportunity to turn your mic on and ask a question live, so please make sure you use that Q&A box, and you'll see that at the bottom of your screen there. And a reminder that we are after questions we can all learn from, so please not too many statements. Just to note that we've extended consultation as well on this proposal to 10th of January 2024, and we will hold another webinar next month with details to come. Now let me hand over to Mallee Farmer and GPSA Chair John Gladigau, who will provide more details on the proposal from a Grain Industry Fund point of view. Over to you, John.
Thanks very much, Brad, and thanks to everyone who's either joining the webinar live today or who's watching a recording of it for your interest in this reform proposal for changes to the grains levy collection system here in South Australia. Personally, I've only been on the board of GPSA for 3 years, and when I first came onto the board, I really myself wasn't fully aware of everything that GPSA did or its roles or responsibilities and how it really added value to the South Australian grains industry. But in that 3 years, I've had the privilege of sitting around the board table with a group of fantastic grower directors and independent directors, and seeing firsthand and hopefully contributing myself in a meaningful way as we've lobbied for and overseen many things, including the removal of the GM moratorium. We had a major biosecurity incursion with the threat of land snail a couple of years ago impacting on our industry, which we curtailed. There was major behind the scenes lobbying for the rights of grain farmers through the Mining Act. There's been the new hydrogen and renewables legislation, which is out at the moment, which impacts on right to farm, which we're working on. There's the new Biosecurity Act, which is currently before the South Australian Parliament. There's also been conversations with our WA counterparts around the Indigenous heritage legislation, which was recently repealed, and we'll continue to be monitoring that as well. I think growers in South Australia are fully aware of the work that we've been doing on the Harvest Fire Code, and whilst we've had a good result with that so far, we'll continue to lead the fight on that going forward. We've also just set up a spray drift working group led by Director Nick Hillier, which is committed to working with growers, with machinery dealers, with chemical resellers, and other industry groups such as wine grapes to ensure that we maintain a responsible industry standard, allowing us to retain the chemicals that we so much need to be able to farm in an environmentally sustainable manner going forward. I'm not sure if everyone is also fully aware that GPSA is also an active member organisation of groups such as Grain Producers Australia, and also our cross-commodity representative group here in South Australia, Primary Producers South Australia. And we, as GPSA, make significant financial contributions to both of these in order to be the influential voice for the South Australian grain producers that we need to be. And through PPSA, we also make the largest financial contribution to their membership of the National Farmers Federation, which also allows us to have representation on their national policy councils on a whole range of issues, including trade, economics, telecommunications, national resource management, and much more. We are really fortunate here in South Australia to have in place the grains levy system through the Primary Industry Fund. And I think that we can all agree that we have much to thank our forebears for their vision and their foresight in creating a system and structure which is without a doubt the envy of the rest of the grains industry here in Australia. And as the chair of GPSA and as a lifelong grain grower myself, I'm very aware not only of the value of our very unique GIF grain levy system, which funds GPSA, but also of the benefits that these funds give our growers for advocacy, for policy formation and leadership information to improve the profitability and the sustainability of South Australian grain producers. And then we've got our sister Grains Industry Research and Development Fund, which provides targeted research specific to the South Australian grains industry through SAGIT, which Andy Barr will talk about in just a moment. But with all things, they need to be constantly reviewed to ensure that they remain fit for purpose, as our industry evolves and looks to set up the next generation of grain growers here in South Australia. The reality is that when the grain levy system was initially set up in South Australia, we were a very different industry. Most farms were mixed cropping enterprises, mixed cropping livestock enterprises, and based predominantly around wheat and barley. And so at that time, it made complete sense to set up a volume-based levy aimed at crops of similar value per tonne. And while there was never the expectation at the time that the rate would never rise, the reality is that the volumetric rate has not actually increased at all in the last 12 years, which in many ways is a fantastic testament to those who have been managing those funds, because they've managed to squeeze every bit of value out of every last dollar for those funds. But as every South Australian farmer knows, our industry has changed dramatically in the last 10 to 20 years. And our levy funds paid to both GPSA and SAGIT have influenced this. I mean, it's been a significant swing towards continuous cropping, towards precision agriculture, and the production of higher value crops such as lentils, canola, chickpeas, durum, etc. And so this in turn has actually created some form of disparity, because a lentil grower who is receiving $900 to $1,000 a tonne, or a canola grower who's receiving $600 to $700 a tonne for their product, is today paying the same amount of tonne levy as a barley grower who's receiving $250 to $300 a tonne. And yet at the same time, those of us who are growing those high value crops have without a doubt probably been the greatest beneficiaries of all the advances created by the R&D provided by SAGIT and the influence of GPSA and the bodies of which it's a member of. So as such, the proposal that we're consulting on at the moment is in two parts. The first is to create a much more equitable levy collection system, which is fit for purpose for today and for our foreseeable future. And secondly, it's about providing an uplift to those funds collected so that we can continue to build on the advocacy, the leadership, and the quality research that we need, and targeted to allow us to continue to be at the forefront of the grains industry here in Australia. So we're very aware that at the moment, the current system for levy collection is all about production. And under the proposed system, it's actually more about the value of the commodities themselves. So as such, we've completed extensive modelling with the use of an external and independent consultant, and scenario analysis using historic production and grain pricing from all of our farmer directors and the trustees of SAGIT and other selected farmers from right across all regions of the state. We are very conscious that grain levies come directly out of farmers' pockets. And our 7 farmer directors on GPSA are all levy-paying grain farmers representing most of the grain growing regions of the state, from the EP to the Mid-North, to Yorke Peninsula, to the Southeast, East, and myself in the Murray-Mallee region. And let me tell you, not one of us wants to be paying $1 more than what we need to, just like all other grain growers in the state. So our focus has been 100% on coming up with a proposal which is fair across the board, and it will give us the impetus to grow the industry going forward as well. So we're currently in a period of high grain prices, but every grain grower I speak to doesn't expect this to last. I think as farmers, all of us we're pretty much a glass half empty when it comes to grain prices. We're pretty happy to take them where they are at the moment, but none of us probably expects that they're going to last. And I think most expected that there'll be a return to the numbers of previous years once global production stabilises a little bit more. So in order to do the modelling, we were very conscious of being conservative. And as such, we've used average pricing over the last 10 years. And this is also on the recommendation of PIRSA, who insisted we go that way. On this basis, the independent modelling shows us that by setting the GIF, which goes to GPSA, at 0.1%, and the GIRDF, which goes to SAGIT, at 0.12%, it would mean they would rise by 8.5 cents a tonne and 4 cents a tonne, respectively. So that's a joint increase from 50 cents a tonne to 63 cents a tonne. Remembering that 13 cents a tonne, but that is based on 10-year average pricing. Many people have asked us to provide modelling for different areas across the state, and the reality is this really is actually a really difficult thing to do and not a real fair comparison, as the results will vary basically from farm to farm, from region to region, depending on their enterprise mix, and also on the prices that they're able to achieve for the products that they grow. The reality is, though, is that those with a much higher proportion of high-value crops will be paying a lot more. But it could also be argued that we are the ones that have benefited most from the changes to the production systems over those times. Whereas those in the traditional cereal pasture rotations will probably be affected the least. If I call a spade, in the current system, a lentil grower is paying 20 cents a tonne for the GIF fee, which goes to GPSA. If the proposed system were in place and we're receiving $900 a tonne for lentils, they would be paying 90 cents a tonne. On the other hand, if barley prices were to drop and we had a really poor year with a pinch finish and we have growers that are selling barley 3 for $150 a tonne, under the current system, they'd be paying 20 cents a tonne. Under the proposed system, they'd only be paying 15 cents a tonne. We believe that this is a far more equitable system going forward. So remembering also that this proposed change would only come into play from the 2024-25 harvest, and who knows where grain prices will be then. Without a doubt, if they were in play in the last 2 seasons, the increase will be much more significant, but will those prices remain? Who knows? The GPSA board is fully focused on using those levy funds wisely for the benefit of the industry. And we believe an uplift in the contribution to GPSA has never been more important at a time when we all know that there are rapidly changing consumer expectations around the environment, around climate change. There are concerns about food safety and health. We have high cost of production and declining terms of trade. There are possible restrictions on chemicals and fertiliser. We're all having difficulty in accessing labour. There's the increasing risk of biosecurity incursions. And all of this, which is happening in a rapidly changing political environment where it can be a struggle at times for our voices to be heard. But at the end of the day, this is a decision for growers. These are your funds. I know that I'm probably now sounding a bit like a politician. I apologise for that because I don't like to do that. But these levies are taken from your hard-earned grain proceeds. So you need to decide if you are getting value for your state-based grain levies and whether a more equitable collection system and an uplift is justified. We, as the board of GPSA, firmly believe that the proposal is sound, and we're asking for your support. So we ask you to just take your time to read the proposal very carefully. Ring your local director for a chat. You can find their details on the GPSA website. Give me a call. My door is open at any time. We'd be quite happy to talk to you about the proposal and any concerns that you might have. But most of all, please find the time to vote. so that we know that we're leading the industry in the direction that the growers want. Thanks for that. Back to you, Brad.
Thanks, John. Just a reminder too, if you're a GPSA member, you would have received a copy of the consultation document and a survey seeking your support for these changes. We need your feedback before 5 p.m. on the extended deadline now of 10th of January 2024. So if you haven't yet, please complete the short survey or vote. We'll put the link in the survey, link for the survey in the chat box. So if you can click on that and complete it, that would be much appreciated. We'd encourage you also to contact John, your local GPSA director or SAGIT trustee at any time to discuss the proposal in more detail. We'll now hand over to Professor Andy Barr, former plant breeder, researcher and grower, and newly appointed chair to SAGIT. He will outline the proposal to change the SA-based R&D contributions under the Grain Industry Research Development Fund. And just a quick reminder before Andy starts, please put any questions you have in the Q&A box as you think of them so we can put them to the speakers later on. Over to you, Andy.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm in the very privileged position of being chair of SAGIT, and this morning I hope to just give you a refresher on what SAGIT is and what it does, and a little about our vision for the future and why this proposal is so important to the future of SAGIT and the research portfolio that it funds and manages. So a reminder about SAGIT, we are unashamedly a parochially South Australian focused research fund. We invest in R&D and extension for the benefit of South Australian grain growers. We are a small fund, but we like to think that we get good value for every dollar that we invest. And in that vein, we collaborate strongly with GRDC, which is the big brother of research funding in the cropping industries, and the South Australian Grain Hub to leverage your funds to greater effect. If you look at how we've been funded over time, it's been a fixed rate per tonne over the duration of SAGIT's existence. It started at 12 cents a tonne, and it's been at 30 cents per tonne since 2013. That fixed rate means that we raise somewhere between $2 and $3 million a year, which we allocate to various new projects, and we try and smooth that investment a little by holding reserves so that we don't prejudice the careers of our researchers during periods such as extended droughts. So what's our focus? We fund via an open call to get the best ideas from the research community. We fund in every aspect of agricultural science, pathology, entomology, genetics, plant breeding, but we're also into extension, training and education. And we're also, we view our role to support the R&D required to ensure the vision of the Grains Producers SA blueprint for the grains industry is realised. So any of the research questions that have arisen in that document, we have added to our list of items that we are interested in funding and have identified and funded a number of those over the last 3 years. We also like to think we're an incubator for new ideas because we have an open call. Any new idea with merit can be funded, and many of our small startup projects are then picked up when they show promising results by GRDC and funded in a much longer and larger scenario. So just to give you some practical examples of the sorts of things that SAGIT fund, if you look at issues arising out of each year's harvest, last year there was an issue with white grain disorder and Fusarium head blight in the mid and upper north of South Australia. And so SAGIT combined with GRDC has immediately funded research on this problem so that when next it occurs, we're better prepared. It's a very episodic condition, and so we need to strike quickly to gain insights into it to be better prepared. So we also develop in capacity building. We have a program of supporting early career interns in research and development. And over the last years, we have supported 14 of those, and almost all of them are employed actively in the ag industry in research or extension. And that has had a big impact, I think. In some ways equivalent to the rural doctors scheme, where we try and get people from rural areas, trained in rural areas, to stay in rural areas to support the innovation that we want to see in the grains industry. So some other examples of that investment in the future, we try and fund initiatives at high school level, at university level, and in early career development. So for instance, this year we've funded the lead ag teacher to promote the best possible curriculum for ag science at high school level. We fund a crop competition between competing high schools to engender interest in the technologies of farming, and we fund a student compendium for university students so they can see the incredible opportunities in the agricultural sector. We also fund a number of publications, and if you look at this montage of publications, there are two in particular there I'd highlight: the South Australian Sowing Guide and the South Australian Gross Margins Guide. And I think they are two of the most important resources that every agronomist and many farmers use to drive their decision-making process for two very important parts of their farm management plan. So why do we need change? Some of this will reiterate the points made by John, but the grain industry has changed. We think that the grain growers who have benefited from the use of lentils and canola in particular are not really paying their share of the research and development levy. This will also bring the levy system into alignment with GRDC, the way that they collect their levy, and over time that's proven to be a very robust system and has managed to keep pace with changes in the pricing and production of different commodities. So it's a model that I think is a very good one. I guess the other reasons for change, we fund only half of the projects that we receive each year, and we expect that some of them won't be high priority projects, so that's okay. But we're starting to see that some of the bigger projects are no longer coming to SAGIT because researchers know that we just don't have the level of funding to be able to support those. In the lead up to this decision being made to change our levy system, we looked at the rate of rise of research costs to SAGIT. We knew that we were funding less research than we were in 2012, but when we analysed the salaries, for instance, of University of Adelaide lecturers and research staff, as well as their technicians, over that period there's been a 35% increase in their wages. During that time, the cost of travel, consumables and accommodation has more than doubled. So when we did that analysis, we could see very clearly that, yes, we are struggling to fund the amount of research that we were in 2012. So we also would like to fund more ambitious projects. And so if we're going to fund the best and most impactful projects and cover the cost increases in the research, then we needed a better way. And that's why in discussion with GPSA, we've put together this proposal. So the proposal for the SAGIT levy, the GIRDF, is to go from 30 cents per tonne to 0.12% of farm gate value. So we looked at this in many different ways to assess the impact on growers and the impact on our research portfolio. So we looked at 10-year prices and production provided by PIRSA, and this proposal gives a 14% increase. We looked at 5-year prices and production. That would give a 37% increase. We looked at 2022 in isolation. We looked at pre-COVID pricing and post-COVID pricing. We looked at statewide figures, and we looked at 15 individual farms. And so we believe that the increase will, depending on the year, the circumstance, be settling out between 10 and 35%. And as we said before, on 10-year prices and production, the figure will be 14%. So for SAGIT, it probably won't fully redress the increases in salaries and consumables in research projects, but we'll go partway there. And if grain prices stay high, well, it'll go most of the way there to redressing that. So that's the proposal that you have to discuss amongst your peers and, to, as Brad said, to vote on. We think we get tremendous value out of our small research fund. It has funded over the years many successful and impactful projects, and we hope that its future will be guaranteed by this proposal. So thanks for your time, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Andy. And I'd also encourage you all to visit the SAGIT website if you want any more information on the projects that SAGIT has delivered over the years. There's a lot of good case studies on that website. What we'll do now is we're going to go to 2 champions of change for the GIF. And we've got a video from Craig Davis and a statement from Chris Maloney.
G'day, yeah, Craig Davis here from Crop Consulting Services and GPSA RD&E. Just wanted to put a few words in around the advocacy provided for industry by GPSA. Thanks to Brad and team and the board and the chairs, including John and those previous to John. I'd like to thank you for your work in taking on communications from members through survey and direct conversations and the committees, and dealing with those issues and progressing them in a positive way for industry. We've actually seen a few significant wins in years gone by, and we'd like to see that continue and strengthen, because as an industry we have some significant challenges domestically and overseas that we obviously need to deal with, and to be able to deal with them in a positive way as we have demonstrated in years gone by. It's a fantastic testament to GPSA and Brad and the team. So thanks everyone.
Chris Maloney has asked us to read out a statement. So these are his words. GPSA plays a fundamental role in representing South Australian growers and ensuring the future competitiveness and sustainability of the South Australian grains industry. For our industry to continue to create and capture value whilst adapting to a changing climate, community values and geopolitical influence, strong and well-resourced advocacy is required. We need to modernise our contributions to better reflect future challenges and opportunities. Again, those words from Chris. Thank you. We'd now like to invite Lon McMurray to share some insights on some work he's undertaken on developing lentil varieties for low rainfall and sandy soil areas. As we all know, lentils are an extremely valuable crop, and to be able to have these grown in a wide range of areas across the state has enormous benefit, not only to individual growers, but the industry as a whole. This is a prime example of grain producer contributions through SAGIT delivering for the sector. Over to you, Lon.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you to GPSA for the opportunity to talk today on this SAGIT-funded research, which has been conducted by Global Grain Genetics. And Global Grain Genetics, as way of introduction, is the breeding arm of Grains Innovation Australia, which is a private plant breeding company which has recently released the lentil varieties GIA Thunder and GIA Lightning, amongst other varieties. So the project we're talking about today is lentil varieties for low rainfall and sandy soil environments, and it began with SAGIT funding in 2018 and was refunded in 2021. And back in 2018, when we put the project up, lentils were an established crop, as you can see by the graph on the right there, in the reliable areas of South Australia, with approximately 200,000 hectares of lentils grown in South Australia, and that was predominantly in the mid-north, in the reliable areas of the mid-north and the Yorke Peninsula. There was interest of growing lentils in the Mallee and other low rainfall regions, such as the Upper Eyre Peninsula, and there had been some success, but production was generally variable and low, and at that stage in 2018, production in the low rainfall areas was less than 1% of the cropped area in those areas or in those regions, and an increase of around 5% at that time of the cropped area, which isn't seen as a massive improvement, would see around 150,000 extra hectares of lentils grown in South Australia. So obviously the interest was there. There were some issues of growing lentils in those regions, and reliability was compounded by the sandy soils of those environments as well. At that time, all the varieties produced were for the reliable areas, so no varieties had been produced specifically for low rainfall areas in South Australia. And there was no breeding work being done in the low rainfall areas of South Australia. The breeding program run by GRDC and the government to that stage was focusing on the Yorke Peninsula and mid-north areas of South Australia. And also there was some recently released novel pulse herbicide tolerances like the metribuzin tolerance, which offered in lentil, which offered huge potential to help production in those areas, but it was in backgrounds which were poorly adapted to the low rainfall areas. In fact, they weren't well adapted to the existing lentil production areas, never alone expanding lentil areas. So GDG identified these opportunities for low rainfall, but it was market failure research, and we obviously needed a research partner to be able to attempt to develop lines for these regions. So the project commenced in 2018, and I'll talk about some of the key findings from that project. It had the broad aims of understanding the traits needed for lentil production in those areas, looking at some novel traits that we had in our germplasm of high vigour, and new herbicide tolerances, as I mentioned, to things like metribuzin tolerance, and then to develop germplasm with these multiple adaptive traits for low rainfall areas of South Australia, and hopefully that will lead to varieties specifically to be adapted and increase production in those areas. We also wanted to screen a diverse range of germplasm from the collections housed by the Australian Grains Gene Bank to the sandy textured soils, because we know lentils were poorly adapted to those sandy textured soils which exist in the low rainfall areas. So we had 4 key research sites, you can see by the stars on the map, 2 in the Mallee, 1 at Loxton, 1 down at Pinaroo, 1 on the sandy soils of the northern Yorke Peninsula around Butte, and 1 on the upper EP, mainly around the Lock area, but in recent years it's gone up a bit further north. So some of the findings we found in the early stages of the project were in our trials held in those low rainfall regions was that grain yield in lentils was strongly correlated with rainfall, but not just growing season rainfall from November through to October. And that was unlike what we'd found previously in the Yorke Peninsula and the mid-north areas, where rainfall is often poorly correlated with lentil yield in some of those areas and seasons. And in particular, a really good finding of this research, a practical finding for growers in low rainfall areas, was the value of the the preceding or the summer rainfall to lentil production. So this was able to say to growers in those low rainfall areas that if you had some good subsoil moisture or you had some summer rainfall leading into this season, there was a greater chance of a successful yield with lentils compared to a year where there was no rainfall or no subsoil moisture in, say, April, and then you're really reliant on a favourable spring in those areas to get yield. So that was an early significant finding and a difference to lentil production in the reliable areas. Another finding we found from the trial work in the early days was the link with biomass or dry matter production in lentils up to the pre-flowering stage and grain yield. So in the low rainfall areas, it was a strong correlation between dry matter at 10 weeks after sowing, but an even stronger correlation of dry matter at flowering and grain yield. And that linked with some work done by Sam Trengrove on the Northern Yorke Peninsula, and also Victor Sadras and Lachlan Lake, who'd looked at varying environments and yield environments across South Australia. So again, the practical outcome of that for growers in low rainfall areas was that accumulating biomass was really important, and they could do that by early sowing. So getting the lentils in early in those environments, and obviously getting them into linking that with the previous finding of getting them into subsoil moisture, and also doing all agronomic management practices which promoted good biomass and good dry matter production. So things like avoiding herbicide damage, avoiding insect attack, sandblasting, sowing into retained stubbles, all those things which encourage early biomass production were important. And in particular on the herbicide tolerance, what that alerted us to was that we needed good levels of herbicide tolerance for the low rainfall areas, combined with good levels of early vigour and biomass for the low rainfall environment. So that became a real target of the breeding program. We also validated the newly released broadly adapted lines GI Thunder and GI Lightning by having this network of trial sites in low rainfall areas. And you can see by this graph that Thunder is broadly adapted across all yielding environments of South Australia, and Lightning is also higher yielding than all the other IMIs and similar to the popular conventional disease-resistant line PBA Jumbo 2. But I guess of particular importance was that those yields were still holding in the lower rainfall areas as well, but the yielding improvement was not obviously as great as there has been in the higher yielding environments. When we broke that down a bit and looked specifically at the SAGIT funded trials, the interesting thing was that while Thunder was a more broadly adapted line and yielded high compared to, say, varieties like Hallmark across all environments, Lightning actually was higher yielding on the sandy textured soils in the SAGIT project work. So while it was 6% lower yielding on other textured soils, Lightning was 3% higher yielding than Thunder on the light sandy soils. So that again gave us a clue. Lightning has a different biomass accumulation method to most lentil varieties. It tends to grow and produce flowers, and its pods produces biomass while it is flowering and podding, later in the season. And that looked like being a successful strategy, particularly in the mallee areas on the sandy soils. And Lightning has become a key parent in the crossing program to try and improve yields in these environments. I mentioned that we wanted to look at trying to get the novel early vigour trait into material. So this was a line we'd created in a hurricane population, which had high levels of early vigour. And as I said before, that early vigour and biomass is important for low rainfall production. So we evaluated that line in our trial series. And what we found was that we improved early plant biomass by up to 40% with this line at 10 weeks after sowing, and up to 10% at flowering, but it became more erratic at flowering. The line was fairly poorly adapted itself, with yields varying across environments. However, it gained a lot of interest by growers, particularly on the Upper Eyre Peninsula, and it's been crossed into our program, and specifically crossed into our herbicide torrent lines, which suffer from a lack of vigour and biomass. So we're using this line to try and improve biomass and vigour in the herbicide torrent material. We also wanted to look at novel ways of addressing potential improvements in the low rainfall areas. So one of the things we did was we grew a mutant population of the popular lentil variety PBA Jumbo 2, which was high yielding, not specifically high yielding in the mallee, but had very good levels of disease resistance. And we grew that in conjunction with our cooperators Wade and Chad Nichols at Pinaroo over a hectare block, and scouted it multiple times during the year, and selected 80 novel selections varying in traits like vigour and growth and pod set in the Pinaroo environment. And then we fast tracked the single plant selections taken out and fast tracked their increase so we could evaluate them in the project. So in 2020 and 21, we evaluated those 80 selections and across 9 of our sites. We whittled them down over time, getting rid of lines which didn't perform. And you can see there that there's a number of those jumbo selections come from the Pinaroo mutant selection, which are yielding up to 12% higher than PBA Jumbo, and similar to Thunder and higher than Lightning across those 9 sites over 2 years. And they also varied for some agronomic traits, which I have put in that table, things like vigour, flowering day, maturity, and biomass production. So one of those lines, the line listed there as GIA 2106L, has been seen as to be the most line offering the most potential in the low rainfall areas from the jumbo background with that disease resistance I mentioned. And we have 2 tonnes, we're hoping to get 2 tonnes of pure seed production of that line at the end of this year, with the potential that it could become a variety for the low rainfall areas, offering an increased yield over jumbo, but with that disease resistance, which is so important in all areas of lentil production. Another aspect of the project was to see if we could look for some novel sources of tolerance to the soil texture, which predominate in these low sandy soil texture predominate in these low rainfall areas. So we developed these seedling screens using A and B horizons from the target environments, and we screened, started to screen our elite germplasm material, and then we did that and found variation to both the A and the B horizon in the elite material. We compared it with performance in a standard potting mix, which we use, so we could compare each line back to its performance in the potting mix. And while we found variation, we didn't really find any increase in lines over the popular variety PBA Bolt, which was a conventional line, performed well in the mallee areas. So we then, in the second part of the project, have explored lines from the Australian Gene Bank, and we've sourced over 500 lines from the Gene Bank. We've screened 350 to date. So these have come from all around the world and are available in Australia through the Gene Bank. And we screened these lines, and 9 of them have shown some significant improved early seedling growth compared to PBA Bolt, with a couple of them showing exceptional improvement. So those lines have been crossed with our elite lines, such as Thunder and Lightning, and other herbicide torrent lines already in the program. So currently where we're at with the work is that the crossing, which we started in 2018, has now produced a number of early generation lines, and we evaluated over 300 lines from those crosses specifically for low rainfall areas in our trial series in 2023. And a lot of those incorporate the early vigour and the novel herbicide torrents, such as the metribuzin torrents, and we've just completed harvest and going through that data now, with the aim of selecting a few to promote to advanced testing in 2024 and potentially varieties. We're also continuing the soil texture tolerance screening for the next few months, looking at some more material from the gene bank. We've also completed another round of strategic crossing of low rainfall traits, which have come through the project. And I guess one of the things which was really significant in the last couple of years has been the communication of finding an extension of best practice lentil production strategies in low rainfall areas. And I've been involved with over 20 field days and workshops in the Mallee, Northern Yorke Peninsula and the Upper EP in the last 2 years, including with the Air EP and the Mallee Sustainable Farming System groups. And a lot of those this year on the Upper EP were particularly with growers who have either grown lentils for the first time this year or are thinking of growing lentils for the first time next year. So I'd just like to acknowledge SAGIT for the work, for funding the work, for my research colleagues, Dr. Michael Matern, Morella Butch and Jacob Matern in GGG. Michael Moody from Frontier Agronomy, who helped us greatly with the Mallee trials. Sam Trengrove and his group, Trengrove Consulting, who helped us with the Upper Yorke Peninsula trials, and Andrew Ware from EPAG, who's helped us with the Eyre Peninsula trials. And a host of grower collaborators and also Grains Innovation Australia. Thank you very much, Brad.
Thanks, Lan. Now we're going to jump straight into question time. Thanks to those who've submitted questions. If you think of any more questions during this session, please pop them in the Q&A box and we'll endeavour to get to them. We'll start with a question that's going to go to John Gladigau. Is GPSA concerned that if grain prices plummet, so will the income to the GIF, whereas under the current system, it's based on yield only?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Look, I guess at the end of the day, there's no perfect system, and there's always a risk in a value-based type system that if grain prices increase, that there'll be an uplift, but if they decrease, that there'll be a decrease in income as well. I think that the whole thing about this proposal has been about making it a more equitable system for growers going forward, and it's up to us as GPSA and as SAGIT to be able to manage those funds. But I think between the trustees and the board absolutely believe that this is a much more equitable and fairer system going forward.
Thanks, John. We'll throw on to Andy Barr. Andy, shouldn't the government be providing more funding for research rather than growers?
There is no doubt there is a problem in the federal and state government sphere that across the board contributions to the state departments of agriculture and CSIRO have declined in real terms over the last 10 years. I'll leave that to my friends in GPSA to do the lobbying required to redress that. But in the meantime, our focus is on what we can do to bridge the gap. And so that's why our emphasis has been in capacity building, like the intern projects, supporting students at high school and university level, and why we fund a number of our projects are undertaken in the private sector, either by small research companies like the one that Lan and his peers run, or whether it be small agronomy companies like Trengrove Consulting at Butte, that we fund a number of projects through them. We have collaborators across the state in private sector agronomy companies that we are supporting, and if we have to fund in that space, then we will.
Thanks, Andy. Next question that we've had submitted, and this is up to you, John, and whether you want to provide this detail, but they're wondering, as a grain producer, given this will affect you as well personally, what will be the contribution change for your farm under the two proposals?
Oh, thanks, Brad. That's a good question. Look, I think as we've mentioned previously, we've done a great deal of modelling right across different farms, right across the state, and to be fair, that those growers who participate on the basis of remaining anonymous. But yes, I am a grain farmer myself. I'm quite happy to be quite transparent about what it does mean for our own business. I'll give a couple of examples. I think, like as I said, we did the numbers based on 10-year averages in all of our modelling. But if I actually go back and look at where our farm was at in 2017 compared with where it's at today, and look at what we would have paid in those couple of scenarios. In 2017, we were in the Northern Valley of South Australia near Loxton, and in 2017 we were growing significantly less legumes than what we are today, but our farm was still growing a lot more than other growers in our area who were more focused on growing cereals. But in 2017, if the proposed 0.1% of the GIF were in place that year, we would have paid an extra 5 cents a tonne to the GIF. And if the proposed 0.12 SAGIT levy was in place in that year, we actually would have had a slight reduction of just under 1 cent per tonne in that year in 2017. However, the joint increase between the two in that year would have been around about 5 cents between the two funds. So we would have, instead of paying 50 cents a tonne, we would have been paying 55 cents. That's in 2017. If we move ahead to 2022, completely different scenario. It was, one of our best production and grain price years in history. We had a much higher level of legumes in that year, and as we know, legume prices were sky high, and our yields were absolutely off the charts. It was just the most incredible year, and that big increase was pretty much based around legumes and lentils and chickpeas, especially for us. So in 2022, last year, the joint increase of the two levies would have been approximately 32 cents a tonne. And that I must admit, that sounds a lot, going from 50 cents a tonne to 82 cents a tonne. And it sounds a lot even to me, but it was an exceptional year like we have never seen before. And we would argue that the reason why we were able to grow those lentils and those chickpeas, and it goes back to the work that Lan was talking about before with some of the new varieties and the work that has been done even on our place, Lan, as well, which has made that increase. And so, it's actually a very small price to pay, maybe. So I guess maybe we're going to see those big years as being a great opportunity for us to reinvest in our industry at a time when it needs it most. So that's an example, from our own place. For direct transparency, it's pretty easy, I think, for growers to be able to do it themselves. But I guess we'd probably ask that you don't just compare this year with last year. I mean, last year was a year of exceptional high legume prices, especially. But also look to say, okay, how would I have gone last year? But actually, how would I have gone in 2017? How would I have gone in some of the drought years when maybe some of those legumes didn't perform quite as well?
Thanks, John. I've got another question for you, although, this has come in as a bit of a statement, but I'll frame it as a question. Effectively, it's around doing consultation during harvest. So can you sort of explain a little bit about that?
Look, it certainly wasn't our desire to be doing consultation during harvest, but at the end of the day, this is all about meeting the state government timeframe for legislative requirements. There's essentially a limited windows within the election cycle to make changes to the PIFs fund, and we have to kind of work within those if we wish to make it to work, and we have an opportunity to make a change for next year if we can get the consultation through before then. And so we had a great deal of work that we had to do in due diligence in leading up to the consultation period. A lot of work we had to do with independent consultants, within our GPSA board, and negotiations with SAGIT, with PIRSA, in looking to come up with that fair and equitable system before we could actually go out for consultation. And we agreed to go out in the end to consultation by October the 11th for 2 months. In a normal year, whatever a normal year is these days, from a majority of the state, October the 11th is probably at least 4 to 5 weeks before the start of when harvest gets into full swing. So we would have expected that there was a good opportunity for growers to have a look at it. But of course, as we know, this year was an exceptional early year, and everyone was on their harvesters and into hay really early, or much earlier than normal. But the flip side of that, of course, is that we're now, a lot of farmers are already near the end of harvest, or sort of getting near the end, and will be finishing several weeks earlier than what they normally would because of that early start. And so it's because of that reason that, as Brad mentioned a little bit earlier, that we've decided that we'll extend the consultation period till the 10th of January. We're going to look to hold an additional webinar like this one, which hopefully involve even more growers in hopefully the week before Christmas, because at the end of the day, and they'll take it out of the harvest period, hopefully a little bit. At the end of the day, we want to consult with as many growers as possible. We want to keep this as transparent as possible. We want as many people as possible to have their view. And if there's ways that we can extend ourselves out of that harvest period, so that is not something that makes it difficult for growers, that is what we are going to do. And as I said, our doors are always open, even if you're sitting out in the header and you've got phone reception, call one of us up and have a chat. We'd certainly like to do that.
Thanks, John. Got one here for SAGIT. Growers already pay endpoint royalties. Andy, isn't that used for research?
Yes, it is, but the endpoint royalty collection goes entirely to plant breeding companies and institutions, and it's not used for the other disciplines that contribute to overall productivity, such as plant pathology, entomology, economics, all of the other disciplines that you need to invest in to come up with solutions for all the challenges and opportunities that are involved in crop research and crop production.
Okay, thanks, Andy. And while we've got you there, we'll throw to another question. This was more of a statement that I've got a question out of it. Effectively, it's around inflation. So you talked about research costs going up and some of those other costs involved. How come the GIRF and GIF haven't risen with inflation, or it hasn't been built in?
I guess the way the levies have been set over time has that if you look at the rate per tonne, that had been increased, I think, 5 or 6 times over the length of time that SAGIT has been in operation. That's quite a torturous process. We hope that this process, when we identify the correct rate, will be a little more future-proof, and so hopefully we don't have to go back to government for changes of legislation as often as we did with the fixed rate per tonne.
Okay, thanks, Andy. John, we'll throw to you for this one. The levies already collected at state federal level are in a percentage term as it stands now. Will the proposed changes bring the GIF and GIRDF more into line with those other levies?
Certainly, I think from our understanding that this is our current system is one of the only ones in the country where levies are collected on a volumetric basis, on a cents per tonne basis. And so, yes, it certainly will bring it into line. It would mean that our levies would be collected in pretty much exactly the same manner as what the federal levies are, which are the ones that go to effectively to GRDC. It can be argued that probably makes it simpler even for those who are collecting the funds, and also for understanding of how they're collected and what they mean for the bottom line. So I think it makes it a much more effective national approach going forward.
John, we've got one more question here, and it's around the process. So can you run us through what the process is now from here? So once votes close, what happens next?
Look, basically, we want to give everyone as much opportunity to have their say, and we just really want people to go out of their way to go to do the survey and to vote and to have their say, so that we know where we're at. Those results will be taken to the Minister from Industries, and we basically, as GPSA and as SAGIT, need to be able to demonstrate to her that we have majority support to be able to change the system going forward. She will then make the ultimate decision about what she proposes going forward, and if that does have her support, then it will go, I guess legislation will be introduced next year to change the PIF legislation in order to bring this into place for the 2024-25 season.
Great, thanks, John. And that's the end of our webinar. So please join me in thanking our presenters, John Gladigau, Andy Barr, our two champions for change, and Lan Murray. Thank you. On behalf of GPSA, I'd also like to thank you for joining us. Hope it's been very informative, and we'll be sending the recording around as well. So thank you once again. Don't forget to submit your feedback as well, your vote for January 10. And we've put the link in the chat box, and we're wishing you, for those still going, the best for harvest. And thanks again for joining us.